Hey guys, welcome back to Brookie Bum. Hey, we're here today with Chris and Gary. They're going to talk to us a little bit about some of the TU projects they've been doing here in West Virginia. Some good stuff going on. So we'll get back to them.
Hi, my name is Gary Birdie, and I work in the West Virginia field office of Trout Unlimited. We do restoration work, and that's basically all we're assigned to do. But we work on private lands and public lands, and here we are sitting at the Island Campground on the Mon National Forest. We did a bunch of work here several years ago, and it's a great place to come fish.
And I'm Chris Wood. I also work for Trout Unlimited. Like everyone else at TU, I work for Gary. And it's great to be here on one of our national forests that each of us own as a birthright of just being an American citizen.
All right, Gary, you want to tell us a little bit about the restoration work and stuff that you guys have done right here?
This is one of the first places that we work with national forest in a big way, and this was a proof of concept of using large wood. And what we did is we were able to take wood from a place where the Forest Service was trying to enlarge a road so that they could make it two-way traffic. And where the margins of that road were, we took the trees that were in that area and we moved them down here, and then we placed them in the stream at strategic points along the way. And the idea being that what we wanted to do was create more native trout habitat here. And in this area, of course, native trout is brook trout. So we were able to do this work. We did it in probably 2013 time frame. It was about 3/4 of a mile on the main stem of the east fork of the Greenbrier, and another maybe 1/4 mile over on the tributary called Cocoa. This work has stood up over several floods and times out of bank. It's doing really well. It's doing exactly what it was supposed to do. The fishery is doing good. People are giving us good marks on the response to the fishing, and I think it's one of the highlights of my career to be involved in this work.
That's awesome. It's hard to overstate. It's hard to overstate the importance of the partnership with the Forest Service. And it's not. What's really cool about the work here on the Mon is that it started with the Forest Service, actually, just doing restoration work here on the forest. But then Gary had the vision that we should try to extend the cold water influence of the Monongahela off the flanks of the Mon onto adjacent private lands. And now I think in West Virginia we've worked with, I think it's over 300 farmers.
Probably closer to 400.
400 individual farmers doing stream restoration, basically making sure that cold water influence continues downstream, which, you know, as you all know, is where you get bigger fish.
So you not only work on the private or public lands, but you're also working with private landowners, correct?
I think the bulk of our efforts right now are on private land, and I think if you looked at the money that we spent and the ability to get, you know, the miles probably that we have influenced, I think private lands are much higher than public lands. Now, I need to say that we raise all our own money.
Right.
We do it through existing programs. We're not adding programs, and we're working in partnership. We have an incredible partnership with the NRCS, which is the Farm Bill program through the USDA.
Natural Resource Conservation Service.
Oh, cool.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's right. And then with the Forest Service, and they're also USDA. We've been able to put together programs that bridge both public lands and private lands in a way that may not have been done well, certainly not in West Virginia before.
Yeah.
But now, you know, it's kind of standard across the country that they partner up on the same kind of programs.
Well, it's also Fish and Wildlife Service, Partners for Fish and Wildlife.
Everything we do on private lands is with partnership with the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Partners for Fish and Wildlife. And we've got partnerships in Virginia, West Virginia, and Maryland now going with them. So we're expanding our footprint beyond West Virginia, trying to take this model that we call the West Virginia model and and employing it in other places around us.
Now, who all can get involved with helping you do these kind of work?
Well, we have volunteer opportunities. I would warn against the idea that somebody might come out and try to do this on their own. And I think we've run into a few things in the past where people, if we add wood to the stream, it must be good everywhere. It's not.
Right, right.
So I think it's easy to become involved. We have survey teams that go out to do shocking of fish, to do population studies to see how far the fish have reached downstream or upstream. We have plantings that take place on a regular basis. One of the things that we want to do is maintain cold water. Right. So the best way to do that is to put shade on the stream. There's studies out there that show shade reduces the temperature beyond. I mean, temperature coming into the reach goes down if it's got shade on it. Right. Yeah. It goes up if it doesn't have shade. So there's a lot of work that we can do with volunteers in that regard. Once we get the big machines running, it's not probably a good idea to have people that aren't familiar with how that works. But there's plenty of work to be done. If anybody wants to volunteer, please get in touch. We will give them an opportunity to do something meaningful. Awesome. And I'll put a link down below this to where you guys can get a hold of him. Thank you. Now, Chris, on a national level, since you work TU National, what are some exciting projects, maybe more based towards a native fish, wild fish going on that you...
Even a step back from what Gary was talking about, part of the reason that we're putting the large wood back into the creeks is that most of these creeks are the flattest feature on the land, and so this is where typically they were logged first. Right. These streams would have naturally, if this were a wilderness area, you'd see all kinds of these big trees which would have historically fallen over and provided cover, and as Gary was talking about, thermal protection for the fish, but just provide habitat. So what we're doing here is something that we're doing around the country as well, which is basically trying to go back in and recreate the sort of natural resilience of these watersheds for the benefit of native fish. Because these fish are so incredibly resilient, I mean, as you pointed out, they've been around for eons, for a millennia. If you give them half a chance, they'll come back.
Is that these watersheds in their natural state had components that over time mankind has taken out. Right. The ability to travel up and down these streams is an important one. That's the part of our mission statement that says reconnect these habitat features. The thermal, the insulation that comes from the sunlight because we've taken down these trees is another thing. The recruitment of these trees in the stream itself, which Chris alluded to, we're putting that back because that recruitment has been interrupted. And it went on for thousands of years, but in the last 100 or so, we've taken these trees away, and they don't have that recruitment anymore. Yeah. So restoration, in my mind, means putting back the ecological components that have been removed. Right. And that's what we're trying to do in this watershed and on private lands as well.
So we have, at Trout Unlimited, we have this thing, we call it a landscape scale approach to conservation. And so if my hand represents a watershed, and here's your high elevation areas with the small streams that feed into the big rivers, what we're trying to do is to protect these high elevation streams that are the sources of the cold, clean water that trout depend on. But we realize that we can't protect these as museum pieces because we've got floods and fires and drought, and fish need to be able to move in response to those natural events. And so we have a whole series of programs, which we do a ton of here in West Virginia, to reconnect these high elevation tributaries by taking out plugged culverts or removing culverts altogether. Finally, down here in the valley bottoms, this is where we do a lot of our watershed restoration. This whole protect, reconnect, restore approach to conservation, it is nothing but a climate adaptation model.
Okay, another element of doing this watershed restoration is the ability to connect disparate habitat types. And what I'm standing on is a bridge that Trout Unlimited and the Forest Service put in on this site to replace a culvert that was perched and it was impassable by fish and other aquatic organisms. Where we're standing right now has fish on both sides, and we did replacement and took the culvert out and put in a bridge and redesigned the stream upstream and downstream so that there would be a continuity of habitat throughout the entire reef. What we saw was within a matter of weeks, fish had started moving upstream, and then within the first year we were seeing fry in this little section of the stream. So this is another one of the elements of a watershed restoration that needs to happen. And I think when you're talking about restoration, you have to be talking about comprehensive restoration in most cases. Looking at what elements are wrong, fixing them, and then putting it all together so that you have this sum that is greater than the parts. And I think what you're seeing in this watershed here, you're gonna see that for many generations to come.
And for years, we didn't really talk about climate change at Trout Unlimited because from our perspective, whether you supported the organization because of this awesome landscape scale approach to conservation, which is also a climate change adaptation model, or whether you were supporting it because it made the fishing better. All this work makes the fishing better. That's all we cared about, was that you supported it. But the fact is we can't continue to pretend that climate change isn't happening. Right. We don't have enough band-aids to apply to these streams to keep these cold water fisheries intact. Yeah. And so it's absolutely imperative that we begin to get serious about slowing the causes of climate change. And so Trout Unlimited is going to increasingly get more involved in climate. We're never going to move away from the work of recovering the natural resiliency of these watersheds. That's our bread and butter. That's our mission. That's where we live. Yeah. But to the extent that we can organize our 300,000 members and supporters in support of common sense legislation to slow the effects of climate change down, we're going to do that.
And I think it's important to realize that most of the practices that you would undertake under the climate change adaptation model that Chris mentions is all good for trout. Yeah. I mean, everything that we talk about, the practices, whether you're a believer or not a believer, if you're a trout advocate, everything that we talk about is in favor of healthier, more robust, more resilient populations of trout. It just, we talk about trying to cool the water down because we are the tip of the spear, or actually the tip of the spear is entering us when we, when we're looking at climate change. Everything that is about climate change, flooding, droughts, warmer temperatures, it all affects the waters, the cold water habitat that we've got. So we've got to do something. Yeah. And I'm really, it gives me a lot of pride to work for an organization that is aware of that and is making the changes and investing in the things that are going to keep cold water cold for trout fishermen and anglers, but also for mammals and all the other animals. The ecosystem that relies on this is much broader than just fishermen. Yeah. And we're right in the middle of it.
And for Wiley and Casey and
that's right.
Trace and Oliver. I mean, it's
if we don't do something, it's going to be gone.
It's going to be gone. Yeah.
And I'm going to say this. In West Virginia, and bringing it back home, is we have probably the best opportunity to have this area of cold water that is really fed by the karst that we have, the limestone springs, the groundwater interactions that we have. This is probably the best chance, I think, as we go up and down the coast, and this is probably one of the highest potential areas for maintaining really good habitat. Yeah. So our investment in this area is probably as long-standing as you can make, and I think I'm really proud to be a part of it.
Talking about the climate change and stuff, you can't avoid the Clean Water Act.
That's right. No, that's right. And
it kind of all goes together.
And the Clean Water Act right now is under attack. So there's a proposal that's out there right now that would remove the protections of about 20% of the stream miles in the United States and about 50% of all of the wetlands, remove the protections of the Clean Water Act for those stream models. And what we're talking about are the small rivulets that often run dry in the summer, but they're really important at different times because they provide cold water downstream, and they're often spawning and rearing habitat, and they provide the nutrients that make rivers like this as healthy as they are. So again, I think it's hard to be a trout fisherman and not educate yourself on what's happening with the changing climate. I think it's even more difficult to be a trout fisherman and not be serious about advocating and protecting the Clean Water Act.
To take that down to the ground level, we have in this watershed and in working with the Mon Forest and the Fernell Experimental Forest, we've been loading wood up into those intermittent streams that are going to be eliminated from protection in order to keep water higher up in the watershed. The idea being that that's where nutrients are forming and the limnic regime is starting out up in those areas. The higher we can keep water in the watershed, the longer we're going to have base flow in drought conditions. It's an important aspect, and if we're not protecting those areas, we're pretty much shooting ourselves in the foot for anything down gradient, which is everything else. The other thing I want to say about the Clean Water Act is, we work in the Chesapeake Bay, and the Clean Water Act has some regulations that are in place in the Chesapeake Bay. And the Chesapeake Bay is everything in the eastern panhandle of West Virginia, the Potomac and some of the eastern panhandle streams, which are really good trout habitat and have some of the best trout habitat in the mid-Atlantic. Most of it is on private land, and those private lands are the people who are being kind of focused in on for some of the Clean Water Act regulatory actions. Well, we're working with farmers on a voluntary basis. And I think Chris mentioned earlier, we probably worked on 400 farms in the state of West Virginia. We're working with them on a voluntary basis. We're trying to make it easy for them to make the choice to do conservation. What sells them are the two words that make Clean Water Act happen, and that is fishable, swimmable water. When we talk about to a farmer and we ask them, everything else remaining the same, would you rather have brook trout on your property or not? 99 times out of 100, they're going to say, I'd rather have brook trout on my property. So once we've got that established with the landowner, then our job is to make it easy for that guy to do that work, right? So if he's a farmer, generally today in farming, they're not getting benefits, they're not getting health insurance, they've got to pay for that. So they all have to have a second job to pay for all that extra stuff. And then they come home and they farm in the evening. Hey, can you put in a fence for us? No, I don't have time for that. We have those services. We put in those fences. Can you help us with an eroding bank? We can help you with an eroding bank. We want pools. We want refugia for the trout. We want places for them to forage and to be able to rest. And they want swimming holes. And it sure does work really well together.
And most important, we'll pay for it. We'll go out and we'll do the application to raise the funds from federal government, typically, or state government. We'll often provide the match so that the landowner isn't in the pocket of anything, and we'll deal with all the paperwork and all the regulatory stuff. I mean, it couldn't be easy.
It's kind of a win-win for the farmer.
That's exactly right. And we do really good work. I mean, we're doing it for the fish, not for anything else. We're not doing it for the money. We're doing it for the fish, and we're mission driven, and that mission, people understand that. People who work with us, our partners, they understand that. Our landowners are happy. I can, of all those 400 farmers, I can tell you less than 1% of them are unhappy with the work that we're doing with it. So I think, Trout Unlimited is in a really good place to be able to reach out and make changes in the long term. And these are sustainable changes. These are not like, one and done and it's over. These are changes in the way they farm, changes in the way the streams work, and they function well. It's pretty in-depth. So this is one project example of some of the work that took place on the East Fork with the Forest Service. And this was an eroding bank, and you can see that we've filled in some of this area. You see these root wads that are along the side here, and then the fill that's on top of it, and you can see that we've planted all this. This is an eroding bank. It was all the way pretty close to the edge of the toe of that mountain right there. And what we did was, while we were doing the crossing work above, there was overburden from that crossing work. So we hauled it down here and we filled this area in and we created this habitat. This is one of probably close to 60 projects that we did in this section of the stream. And it continues on upstream from here. We used a cool machine called a spider hoe to do it, and we contracted the guy to come in, and then we had our fence, not our fence crew, but our wood crew be here to help them out and help them place things in the right place. And it was all under the guidance of the Forest Service's fisheries biologist, fisheries tech, and watershed program.
Hey guys, like so there's like 63 miles worth of reconstruction work done to this stream. This is the East Fork of the Greenbrier. TU's doing a lot of ground and pounding here. And this is all fundraising money, and yeah, they're just putting new structures in, skinning up the pool or the river, making nice runs and big pools. So kudos to Trout Unlimited for the work they're doing here.